Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Rain Kincaid, and I am the director of the Institute for Faith and Learning here at Baylor, the host of this symposium. And it is just a joy to see you all here with us tonight. So many old friends of the IFL, of Baylor, and of the symposium, and of myself, and so many new friends gathered. I've got some kind of announcements to get us started, but before I get to the logistics, I'd like to welcome our campus director of pastoral care and associate chaplain, Sarah Barden, to start us off with the most important thing, a word of prayer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Baylor. It's my privilege to be here praying tonight. I found a prayer I want to pray, and it needs a little bit of an introduction. It is inspired by St. Clare of Assisi's second and third letters to St. Agnes of Prague. These two sisters corresponded for over 2 decades, and they were united in the Order of Poor Ladies. I think it's interesting that someone in the Franciscan Action Network decided to bring these self-proclaimed poor ladies into the AI conversation and to write a prayer. The Franciscan Action Network is a collection of Franciscan voices seeking to transform United States public policy related to peacemaking, care for creation, poverty, and human rights. And they're affiliated with several universities, some who are represented here, so you might want to go check and see if your university is affiliated with the Franciscan Action Network. So, with that introduction, please pray with me. Oh God, as we are users, inventors, and governors of technology, as we make decisions about AI, place our minds before the mirror of eternity. Place our souls in the brilliance of glory, and place our hearts within your divine substance so that we may do only what is holy and right, so that we may do what is in keeping with your divine will for the thriving of humanity and all creation. Keep us from the temptation to use AI for revenge or destruction. Send us forward securely, joyfully, and swiftly on the path of prudent joy in the pursuit of that perfection to which you have called us. And tonight, here at Baylor University, we say thank you for this food before us, the community around us, and the word of Elaine Ecklund that will bless us. Amen.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So just to get us started this evening, first, if you have liked our lovely slideshow, and if you would like to be featured on this slideshow for the rest of the conference, we have an amazing opportunity for you. If you go to Guidebook, which you've probably heard about, on your phone and upload photos, we would love to share them with the rest of the conference. So not only can they be out there on social media, but they can be here with people you're actually seeing, eating with, and talking to. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that function. Couple of folks I want to thank as we get started. First, I'd like to thank Truett Theological Seminary. We are not there right now, but they have been wonderful hosts for us. This is the first time the symposium has been hosted at Truett, and as I hope all of you experienced today, it is a beautiful space for academic discourse, and we really appreciate Dean Todd Still and the Truett faculty and staff for making that space available to us. We also have some groups here tonight that are wonderful partners of the IFL from across Baylor. We have a group called the Conyer Scholars sitting over here. This is a group of graduate students co-sponsored by the Institute for Faith and Learning and Baylor's Graduate School, who gather monthly to explore these issues and really represent Baylor's commitment to research and Christian faith in their person. So Conyers, great to have y'all with us. We have people from the Baylor Center for School Leadership, another important partner to the IFL, who actually hosted their own mini conference connected to this conference, and we are appreciative of that partnership. And we have people here from the Faith and Sports Institute, another great Baylor partner who will be doing some panels tomorrow. And so it's really a pleasure that this is not just an IFL symposium, this is in fact a Baylor symposium. And this is an effort not just put on by IFL, but by leaders and thinkers from across our campus. And we love getting to partner with all of you. So thank you for all of you than the work that you do. And speaking of amazing partners, to share a few words before I bring up our plenary speaker, I'd like to introduce our provost, Nancy Brickhouse. Dr. Brickhouse oversees the university's 12 colleges and schools, research enterprises, the libraries, and the centers and institutes. So in other words, she's my boss. She has been a huge supporter of research at Baylor and is utterly committed to Baylor's Christian mission and identity. She's been a warm supporter of the IFL and especially of this symposium. So Provost Brickhouse, thank you for being here. Thanks for your support.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here at Baylor for this wonderful symposium. We've been waiting for you for a long time. Very excited about the subject of this conference, and of course, very excited about welcoming such wonderful colleagues from across the country. I guess this is our symposium on faith and culture that we host every year, that the IFL hosts every year. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Kincaid, for your amazing coordination of this event. I know it's been a lot of work, but let's all give Elizabeth a round of applause. We're truly grateful you're here. Scholars, practitioners, students, friends gathered to reflect on one of the most pressing questions of our time. What does it mean to be a human in an age shaped increasingly by artificial intelligence? And at Baylor, this conversation is not an optional add-on to our academic life. It is central to our Christian mission. As a university committed to integration of faith and learning, Baylor's invested deeply in thoughtful, ethically grounded engagement with emerging technologies. We believe that the rapid advances in AI present extraordinary opportunities for discovery, creativity, and service, but they also call us to discernment, wisdom, and a clear theological understanding of human dignity. This symposium exemplifies Baylor's commitment to convening scholars across disciplines and traditions to explore how Christian faith can illuminate both the challenges and the promise of AI. Our hope is that today's conversations will not only inform your thinking, but also inspire imagination, humility, and a renewed sense of responsibility as we navigate this technological moment together. Thank you for being here. We're honored to welcome you into this important and hopeful dialogue. Now I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Provost Brickhouse. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your support and leadership here at Baylor. So I'd like to now introduce our first plenary speaker of the symposium, and I'll make a few comments before that. We have dessert on both sides, so feel free to get up. That cake's not going to eat itself, so walk, help yourself at any point. Dr. Ecklund's going to provide some remarks, and then my associate director, Elijah Jung, will be facilitating questions and answers from the audience. So get your ideas ready. I am so thrilled that we're kicking off the symposium with some thoughts from Elaine Howard Ecklund. We were just so honored and excited to have her here with us. I assume everyone here knows who she is, but just in case, she's a sociologist. She's an author and an academic leader whose work explores how individuals and groups bring their deepest values, especially religious and ethical commitments, into work, leadership, and public lives. She holds a Herbert S. Autry Chair in Social Sciences at Rice University, where she's a professor of sociology and directs the Vonnegut Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance. Along with all that, she's also published 9 books, over 150 academic articles, and led 20 national and international research projects on religion, science, institutional culture, and workplace religious diversity. Her work is widely recognized for revealing how pluralism can be an asset rather than a liability in professional life, and what a message we need now. She's currently focusing on issues of religious diversity in the workplace and mentorship. She received a PhD from Cornell University, and in 2018 she gave the Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and in 2023 received the Rice University Presidential Mentoring Award. I assume she sleeps at some point, but has just been an incredible contributor to inner dialogue across the disciplines, really exemplifying what this symposium is all about. So Elaine, we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Elijah, and just the team at the center. It is such a privilege to be here, and I have been treated so well, which I can't believe. I had no idea how many people were going to be here. I thought maybe there would be 50, and I would feel really good about that. So many more than usually come to a typical academic talk. So the pressure is on. So for about the past 20 years, I have been studying, that's humbling to say that you've been doing anything for 20 years. I have been studying what scientists think about religion and what religious people think about science, and more recently have broadened my work to think about occupations more broadly and how religion enters or doesn't enter into the occupations. And right now I'm going to do a little outline of the talk, of the remarks, and I'll try to be responsible with my time. I think there'll be a group of you who will understand what I'm about to say. This is reminding me I was at the American Association for the Advancement of Science meetings about 10 years ago, and I was on a panel on religion and science, and it was several religious leaders and myself. I still am an academic, but I was representing the academics. And there was a Christian pastor who started his remarks by saying, I have 3 points to share, and he just shared his points. It was excellent. And then the rabbi also said, I have 3 points to share, and he shared his points, and they were very clear. But then the imam also said, and I too have 3 points to share. And by the time we got to the imam starting, I was just absolutely sweating bullets. Like I had little dripples of sweat, and I was looking for a napkin. Because of course I'm the academic, right? So I was going through all of my note cards and my papers and trying to decide and Xing out things and writing 1, 2, 3 as if I could manifest it. And so I actually looked at the crowd with confidence. This is what I teach my students. You just believe it and then you say it, even if it's not true. So I said to the crowd, I too have 3 points to share, but about 27 subpoints. So that is an academic for you, and I think some of you understand, right? We're going to talk about a really, really complicated topic right now. So first I want to share with you a little bit about some of the work that I have been doing with my colleague Denise Daniels and with my colleague Christopher Scheidel. Denise is a professor of business at Wheaton College, and Chris is a professor, a fellow sociologist at West Virginia University. And we have been thinking a lot about how people see their work and faith. And what I'm going to do is take some of that research that we've done and then try to think through the lens of that research towards AI and how we might think about faith, work, and AI with the goal of, as Christians, really sponsoring and protecting human flourishing, which I think is incredibly important in these times. So I'm just going to start with some things that I think we agree on, but I want to make sure that we do. So I want to present them to you. I think we were created to work. We were made as Christians and believe that working is part of the created intent. And we stand at the threshold of a new era, one which is, of course, defined by really rapidly increasing technological shifts, particularly, of course, with artificial intelligence, but lots of rapidly increasing technological shifts, especially in medicine and biology and the natural sciences and engineering, and even in the humanities, there's rapidly shifting technological landscape and shifts. And so I think it's important when we think about work to really ground ourselves in a robust theology of work. God, I think, also intends us to work for the good. I do not believe that work is as a result of the fall. I think it's part of the created intent. We see in the opening pages of Genesis a God who works, who speaks, who creates, who organizes, and then invites humans to join in that work as his image bearers. So when we do honorable work, and of course there is work that's not honorable, but when we do honorable work, we are reflecting the character of God, who is consistently, of course, and constantly sustaining the universe and our very lives. This is all still point one. So now we're on to point 1.2. So I think all work is kingdom work, right, if it's honorable work. So the most important theological shift as we enter into thinking about AI is the kind of theological shift towards one of stewardship, where we are collapsing the sacred-secular divide, and we're seeing new technologies as things that we really ought to steward as workers who were created and made in the image of God and are trying to work in the image of God. We want to collapse that idea that there's worldly jobs because, of course, the folks who create AI technologies are probably the kind of people, if we have a sacred secular divide, because they're in science and engineering and those types of jobs rather than the relational jobs of pastoral work or social work or teaching, we might be tempted to see those as on the worldly side, right? So I think we need to get clear that those jobs too have the possibility of being part of the created intent. So the problem, of course, is that the fall has fractured our labor. And our work can feel like the thorns and the thistles. Work can feel like chasing after the wind, as the writer of Ecclesiastes lamented. We feel the friction between our desire for impact and the reality of bureaucracy, boredom, exhaustion, and even workplace abuse in some cases. I had a student who wanted to go into the technology industry, and very, very creative and quantitative person. And she decided to do a couple of internships in the human user interface at tech companies in the Bay Area. And she did one with one company for a summer, and she didn't enjoy it. And then she's like, well, let's try another tech company. And she said, after this, they thought she was good. They wanted to give her a job, and she would have made 3 times more than what I make now as a full professor at a place like Rice University. And she decided to turn it down and go into the academy. And of course, as I said, it wasn't for the money. But she said, I would have felt, and now not all of you will get this, but I would have felt like I was living in Weber's iron cage. And Weber, of course, if you remember and have read Weber, said that over time, people respond so much to workplaces that have rules that don't respect the individuality of the human person, that you don't need to keep your workers in cages anymore. They internalize that and they act like they're in cages when even they're not. And that's how the industry made her feel. And I thought, wow. What a telling example. She did not have the same theological kind of space that I do as a Christian, but I thought that was just so true what she said, such a true assertion of how work in tech industries can feel like being trapped inside a cage. But I think we have to realize that it doesn't have to be that way. So before we talk about what the sort of do's and don'ts of AI, I think we need to have a vision for the possibility of created intent and a redemptive presence in this industry and in this creative period that we're experiencing. But of course it's hard. I wanted to give you a quote from The Bear. I don't know if some of you have seen it. The main character, Carmi Versato, is a world-class chef and moves from high-end fine dining to his family's gritty sandwich shop. And there's a moment where he just breaks and he says, I feel like I'm trying to fix everything all the time, but nothing gets better. It just keeps getting worse. And it does make me feel, when we start to talk about how we should respond theologically to these new technologies, it sometimes does feel a little bit like chasing after the wind, not in a sense of boredom, but in a sense of freneticism. I don't know if you've been at those, to the fair where you have you have to, I can't remember what they call them, but you have to actually pound down the things that pop up. Whack-a-mole. Thank you very much. I was like, someone will know what this is. You don't know Weber, but you know whack-a-mole. So here we go. So I feel like that with AI technologies, right? I have not actually done that much. I should not be telling you this. This is something I tell my students never to do, but you never undercut yourself. I've done a lot of research and a lot of writing, but I have not written a book on AI. And I'm being invited all the time to give talks on AI, to think about faith work in AI. And I think it's because I'm a fine speaker. You're going to enjoy yourselves. But I think it's because we have a kind of desperation right now. We're trying to get all hands on deck because things seem to be, at this whack-a-mole pace. We're just like, right? You got to get it down. But I want to just tell you a little bit about my own experience of toil. So there's this freneticism I and others are experiencing right now. One of my jobs as a university student was to work in book preservation in the library. That's a fancy way of saying I erased pencil marks from books. The work was boring. It was hard not to fall asleep. And we were allowed to wear Walkmans. Some of you know what a Walkman is, right? And so that we didn't, just totally fall asleep and we were distracted a little bit. But I was not able to do that. You see, I began to read the books and rather than erase the pencil marks, and I got slower and slower at my job because I disliked it so much. I was tempted to show up to work late, to leave early, and the other students got more privileges, as I said, the Walkman thing. And I did not get more privileges. I was told I could not wear the Walkman. And it was over the summer, and so this didn't have a huge impact on my life. But actually, I got fired from that job. So I was not able to work independently, and it was worse to keep me than just let me go. I'm trying to remember exactly how to bring that back in. But later on in the talk, we'll come back to that. So one response to that experience of meaninglessness that sometimes that we feel, that the writer of Ecclesiastes, I think, so presciently said, is to separate our work from the rest of our lives. So if we can think of work as something that's not really part of what is most important to us, perhaps we can avoid that lack of meaning. So I was surprised when we did our research on faith in the workplace that only 20% of people actually view their work as a spiritual calling. When we think about evangelical Christians, that goes up to 37%. 25% of mainline Christians, the Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians see it as a calling, and only 18% of Catholics see it as a calling. And why is it so low? I would argue that we have created a kind of hierarchy of holiness at many of our churches and Christian ministries, where we see pastoral work as being at the top, and then there's other kind of works that are beneath this that really maybe you should do that work to make money so that you can give to the church, but these are not occupations that are inherently holy. And one of the things we did is we looked at some of the tech industry workers in this particular study. We weren't asking them specifically about AI work, but we were asking them about tech work in particular. And a Christian who's an engineer in the tech industry told us, if it comes down to it, really I only see a priest or a nun or a pastor or something like that, or a deacon who really does the spiritual work. But as for me, I see no real connections to my own faith as a Christian, maybe in terms of how much money I make and giving money to the church, but my company, my career, and my job, I'm just doing that to make money. And we found that over and over for folks in engineering, in tech industries in particular. So this is particularly troubling because we also found that calling and feeling called to your work can actually help you to overcome some of the toilsome aspects of your work that people who feel called to their work often are more likely to use their Christian faith to think through ethical challenges to their work, and that feeling called to their work also helps them use the kind of skills that they get through their workplaces in the church, but also in other ways in the world, even outside of their workplaces. Krista is one of the people I interviewed who's a scientist as well. She's a PhD student and she studies marine biology. And she said that her work is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult intellectually. It's incredibly difficult personally for her particular work. She sometimes spends a couple of months out at sea away from family and friends. She said that it's also the people she works with are incredibly difficult. The professors she works with often see their own reputation and putting themselves above others, even students, as the one thing they're passionate about rather than the welfare of their students. And she said she wants to continue doing this work for the rest of her life. She says that her work is deeply influenced by the Christian values that compel her to want to be the kind of person that her professors aren't, to want to be the kind of person who really sees all truth as coming from God, that sees her scientific work as a gift, she told me, who tries to understand and reveal the truth of how the world works. And she says, in that sense, my science itself is a spiritual calling. This kind of feeling of being spiritually called to her work helps her overcome the challenges. She said, I keep going back to work every day because I have a kind of higher purpose that keeps me motivated to do the best science I can and leads me to think strategically about how to help others through my work. She says, calling is everything to me. I wouldn't stay if I didn't feel called by God to be here. We also found, and this is something we're going to come back when I transition to talking about work in AI in particular, we also found that calling can have a kind of double-edged sword. So in one sense, we're told that if you find work that God intended you, or if you're in a work and you realize how to believe and how to recognize the calling, that as one respondent said, I never work a day in my life because I'm just at play there, that I love my work so much. But we also see that there is a sense where people who feel called to their work are also easier to exploit. There is a sense that they're willing to sacrifice their personal time, their time with families, their social relationships. They're able to sacrifice their pay, because work that's that important to feel called to is worth all that sacrifice. We also see that leaders that are in occupations where there's likely to be a high sense of calling, so education, higher education, social work, work for the church, have sometimes an attitude of, we're all here because this is important work that serves society. We ought to just suck it up if we have personal kinds of difficulties in the workplace. So there is a kind of discrepancy, and I want to point out too that discrepancy points to inequalities which are often in the workplace. People who are women and people who are racial and ethnic minorities are disproportionately likely to feel called to their work and disproportionately likely to say that they'd be willing to take lower pay because of the kind of meaning that they get in their work. So calling can be a source of strength, but we also must be sure that as we think through how to be called into this particular space, into technology and into AI technology in particular, that we must ensure that it doesn't blind us to reflecting on the kind of inequalities that an industry can put out into society. So now I want to transition to talking about how AI is changing workplaces, some from my data and some from data that others have collected. So we are no longer speculating about AI. We are living in it. Some think that there was kind of an experimental phase of AI getting out into the broader society in like 22, 23, 24. But especially 25 and now into 26, it seems like, at least in my occupation in higher education, it's sort of all anyone can talk about. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the kind of impact that it's had. We have a sense that AI may be restructuring the workplace. There is a sense in higher education that I've surveyed 2 of my classes now, and it's very clear that young people have incredible anxieties about the impact that AI technologies will have on the future workforce. Those who are Christians have a lot of ethical anxieties. So we're no longer looking at a kind of horizon where AI might arrive. I think we're standing in the middle of it, right? We're standing in the middle of it. We don't really know. We can hardly analyze what just happened a couple of years ago, but we especially feel like we don't know what's going to happen going forward. We're standing in the middle of it in our workplaces, whether they be classrooms or a sanctuary of a congregation, or of course many other kinds of things. There is a sense where AI can really be used for the good. And I want to, as I said at the beginning, to really acknowledge that. There is a sense where AI could decrease some of the toil of our work that the writer of Ecclesiastes writes about. For example, I tried to think through as I was preparing these remarks, what are the toilsome aspects of our work as academics. I remember when I was going to submit an article to a journal, and every journal, I don't know why we do this, but every academic journal has a different kind of format style. And I remember setting aside, I got it down where I was really efficient and I could get it done in 2 days. So and I had to go back through the entire 37 pages of text and make sure every sentence was formatted correctly, and then every reference was formatted correctly. And now, I'm very fortunate Rice University pays for the faculty to have access to a couple of different AI technologies, and I can reformat the citations and bibliography for a journal article in less than 5 minutes. That includes me checking. So that includes me, it's like takes about 30 seconds to load the article in, then the citations are changed, and then I actually read through them, like I check, I'm responsible. So, and that takes me so the 5 minutes is the me checking, is the non-AI part of it. So it's just incredible. And so there is a sense where we are trying to, one of the perhaps redemptive things we could do is decrease toil in work, but, and this is where I think we have another double-edged sword, is that we also are increasingly pushed for efficiency. I remember taking, when I was in graduate school, a class on the labor force and the changes to home technologies that had a great impact on the labor market. And one of the ones that had a great impact was the washing machine, because of course people beat their clothes on rocks. What was after that before washing machine? Probably not beating on rocks, but washing and saying washboard, thank you. It's a really smart crowd. So the washboard, and then you could have home labor, which would take a whole person, right, to do all of that home labor. And the thought was that so many women would go into the workforce when we had washing machines. And that did not happen. People got more efficient and then added more home labor. And there was actually a whole industry that developed around keeping your home really nice. This is the stuff of Martha Stewart, right? Like that becomes a full-time job. If you are going to buy flowers for your home every day and then make sure they don't rot. I actually left some rotting flowers as I was coming out here, so this is not as important to me, I guess. But there, you could do that kind of thing all day for an entire job. So it did not increase our efficiency such that we use that efficiency for more free time to put into something else. I think we need to be very sober here. So as AI technologies increase our efficiency, what am I doing with that 2 days? Well, I'm signing up to write 10 more articles, of course, right? So that's, that's the impact, not 10, but 1. So that's the impact, right, that it's having potentially, is this kind of absolutely unceasing drive for efficiency. I had this experience. I was meeting with a potential donor for our institute, and I showed him something, and I had these examples of how our work is impacting students, et cetera. And he's like, the formatting of this document is not as good as it could be. Have you tried AI? So, this is what I'm trying to give my argument about something that my team spent a couple of days, and probably it could have been better. I'm not saying that I'm not open to critique, but he went right there, like it ought to be at this certain really high level because we have access to these AI technologies. And so I think as Christians, we need to ask ourselves, what happens to the human soul, right, when we remove the quiet pieces of our jobs or the slow pieces of jobs? I wasn't just reformatting my references. I was doing a kind of methodical work with reformatting my references that allowed me to slow a bit and perhaps to reflect on the article I had just written, to be thankful for the team that had helped me write it and all the people had given feedback, and to feel a deep sense of completion when I got that task done and when I submitted. Now my AI technologies can be linked with the journal submission process that I'm not even actually physically submitting, that after I get the formatting done, then it can be submitted. And I no longer feel that sense of satisfaction and completion. Now, I don't need to feel that all the time to know that I'm worthy, right, as a child made in the image of God. But we need to count the cost of that a bit. We need to count the cost of that. I also want to think about inequalities, and I talked a little bit about calling being a kind of space where we can both experience this deep satisfaction, but the kind of things that we sometimes give up, we need to count the costs of that in those occupations where there is a high sense of calling. And likewise, I think we need to start really thinking about the way in which AI has an impact, potential impact, on inequality structures in workplaces. Perhaps especially in workplaces where calling is related to things like interaction with people through social services, medical work, higher education, primary and secondary education. So we may find a kind of temptation to atomize those social interactions. Another thing, of course, that I find deeply toilsome about my work is emailing, right? Like, oh my gosh, talk about whack-a-mole. Like, it's like I can be emailing for an hour, and when I'm done with that hour, it feels like actually my email kept pace with my ability to read it and respond to it. So I may start with 200, and when I end, I still have 200 because that much has come in like a 4-hour period. I mean, it's just really, it just feels so toilsome. But our email interactions can also be deeply relational, right? That we can, it's a little touch. And so what will happen if we atomize that in a way that can be managed by an AI tool, which already people are doing. This is not something, this is well on its way. So how do we think about that? When I talked to my Rice University students, I said I surveyed these 2 classes, so certainly not a representative sample of all students and not even of Rice, but these were students who took my class. I teach a class on religion, science, and health, a sociological approach. And one of the things that we talk about is the intersection between faith and AI, both how AI is changing the expression of faith in American society and how faith might have an impact on AI, might provide some kind of moral guidelines or boundaries around the development of AI technologies. And my students pointed out, this is the primary thing they were concerned about, and I was so proud of them, that AI has an unequal benefit in the world, that certain people benefit a lot, people like me, and certain people really do not benefit from AI technologies. And they wanted to know how we could continue to develop AI technologies. My students wanted to know this, that would have less of an unequal impact on the world. And I think about this in part in terms of the kinds of jobs that will continue and the kinds of jobs that will be both continuing and elevating, and the kinds of jobs that may decline or go away. So 2 conversations that brought this to mind. I sometimes use one of the technologies that we have at Rice, which, as you know, the university purchases these, so supposedly we don't feed into the LLM. And sometimes I use them to get like a literature review started. And my colleague and I were talking about this, and he said, some of the AI tools we have now are at least as good as a first-year graduate student. And I thought, this is going to be some kind of moral stand that we might need to take, right? So when we stop people from doing certain kinds of jobs, you know what, obviously there's a cost to them potentially, there's a cost to us, and are there certain kinds of things that shouldn't be made efficient? So when a graduate student helps me with a literature review, I'm hopefully telling them how to do a literature review. I'm giving them feedback on what they do. They're helping me with the article that we're writing potentially, but I'm helping them. So if I reduce that task, the getting started piece of it, entirely to a technology, an AI technology tool, again, am I counting the cost of what's been lost relationally, what's been lost in the mentoring structure? And so I think we have to think about that. The other thing I think about that is some of the AI grammar assist tools like Grammarly and others seem, under certain conditions, almost as good as a copy editor. For some of my books, I have paid more than $100 an hour for a copy editor to do work that I could get done in a much shorter period of time and supposedly at much lesser cost. But I also have a copy editor that I've been working with for more than a decade who doesn't just do some copy editing, but also gives comments, who's of a different religious tradition than I am, and kind of pushes back on some things sometimes that I say, has at times called me to chat with me about how the work could be better, has had ideas about publicity. And of course, not every copy editor, I mean, I have a really extraordinary copy editor, but I do feel that incredible temptation because of the amount of money that it costs. And I have not really started to fully reflect on the relational loss for using that kind of tool. Our labor economist colleagues argue that there were at least 50,000 job cuts linked to AI in the last 6 months of 2025. They also say, of course, that we need to be wary of AI washing, inappropriately blaming AI, where companies sometimes might use that as a cover for financial planning. I thought that was interesting. The other thing that my students are very concerned about is the environmental impact of AI. And they are very concerned about the global and environmental impact. And they wanted me to point out, I asked them, like, if I do research in this area, what kinds of things do you think are important to discuss and make sure and address in our studies? And they brought up the idea of replacement versus innovation. So under what conditions are we using AI technologies as a kind of excuse to replace a sector of the workplace versus having true innovation, which they thought would mean really trying to bless they don't use the word bless, but really trying to help everyone in the workplace kind of go up in a step of innovation. So what would it mean to go the extra mile, my students argued, to train entry-level workers and workers that are doing jobs that require a high degree of repetition and might seem toilsome, to use AI in appropriate ways to decrease their toil while not decreasing the job itself and doing away with the job itself. And this is going to take incredibly creative leadership in this time to figure out how to do that. And yet, we have all of this, and I found, we just ran a survey at the end of 2024, which, given the rapid pace change in technology, seems like very long ago now, but at the end of 2024, we ran a survey through the Banyuk Institute, and we found that 78% of the general public is very concerned that AI is changing the meaning of being human in ways we will not be able to recover from. There's a lot, we had other measures of fear on the survey, and there's just a lot of fear around AI. Yet when we asked them if their response to AI was shaped by their religious attendance, even for those who attended, only 11% thought that their response to AI was shaped at all by their religious community. So this is clearly not something that we're yet talking about in a widespread way in our churches, and not even probably yet in our Faith at Work ministries. And there are a lot of Faith at Work ministries out there. I think some of them are beginning to talk about it, but some of them have not yet. And so I think this is important, incredibly important, to try hard to think through, especially for those who are pastoral staff, ministers in the room, who lead a religious community, those who are professors, which is another kind of, I think, pastoral work under certain conditions, to really think through with our constituents, with those we serve, what it would mean to use AI responsibly according to the kind of Christian traditions that we have at our disposal. And I'll get there in a minute. I'm on point 2, just if you're counting. So AI is also having an impact on pastoral work. So it's having an impact on work broadly and really a restructuring of the workforce potentially. It's having a specific impact on pastoral work, and I want to talk about that for just a sec. It's leading to what some call the digital pulpit. So some clergy like Rabbi Bogard view AI as a kind of study partner to debate texts with. He said, it frees me up for the real work, which is doing things like sitting at the bedsides of the dying. We also find that AI technologies are influencing practice. So people are more likely to rely on AI technologies for things like sermon preparation. One pastor said that I can get a 900-word sermon in 30 seconds. So I don't know if that's something to brag about, but he said, this frees me up for the real work, which, as this rabbi said, is doing things like counseling people, sitting at the bedside of the dying. Other pastors argue that there is actually incredible drudgery and value in the drudgery of study. I don't think of study as drudgery, but that there is a kind of deep value of that He said that an algorithm doesn't know the story of a congregant's miscarriage or a congregant's divorce or even a congregant's story of abuse. And it cannot convey that kind of integrated, embodied experience of a living human. He said that in my work, I bring all of that kind of living with others to my sermon, and I need that kind of embodied experience to write my sermon. The other thing that we've done is begin to look at technologists themselves, and so far what we're doing at our research team at Rice is simply looking at publicly available comments from technologists, but here are some themes that are coming up in that initial work. These are things that the people who are building AI systems are actually very worried about. So one thing that we're looking at is to what extent are the creators worried about certain kinds of things, and then I want to think through with you as a Christian then how we might respond to these things. So one big worry is what we call bias, or what they call bias amplification. So technologists are sounding the alarm on the fact that AI technologies may amplify beyond even what's really there, the biases against people of color, against women. One example is that for an AI-generated text about Islam contained 1.5 times more reference to violence and conflict than human-written texts about Islam. Christian texts were skewed towards love, they said. So their developers are actually now calling for, quote, explainability requirements rather, to ensure that our algorithms aren't just efficient, but that they also are ethical. So calling for explainability requirements to ensure our algorithms aren't just efficient, but that they're legal and what they are ethical. Technologists are also very concerned about the impact of robots, and some technologies, what they call the CFE interface. So the idea that there will be true artificial general intelligence that may be proven when a machine displays the capacity for having its own relationships with a machine and with humans. So they say this moves us to the CFE society, a collaboration between carbon-based humans and iron-based machines. And they worry a lot about what will happen to our sense of humanness and to our sense of relationship to one another, which I know some of you in this room have written. I see Andy Crouch here have written extensively about that. The technologists themselves are very worried about the impact that the machine-human interface will have on human relationships. I think that's worth listening to. And then thirdly, in our research, we found that technologists are very concerned about the impact that AI technologies will have on so-called hard skills. So you might think about something like being able to, work a room and figure out who to talk to in a room in order to make sure that you get to everyone, and you want to talk to, if you're in the business world, maybe the people who are the most power players, et cetera. Academics, of course, do this too, I think, very inappropriately. And that they argue that actually those skills will be needed more and more, but hard skills, you might think about things like being able to do calculations well or build things well, that those hard skills will actually go away. Because AI, as it advances, will be able to actually take over more of the hard skills, and that there's just a huge number of jobs in the hard skills, and this will have an impact on the way we think about education and higher education, but also just the job workforce in general. And next I wanted to think a little bit, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about these two surveys I did with my students and how Rice University students, just a little snapshot of a group of young people. They also had three kinds of things that they were very concerned about with the development of AI technologies. So let me put those up. They were very concerned over what they call the human spark, what one student called, that the specialness of being human. And these were not, Rice University is not a faith-based institution, it's not a Christian school. It actually, in some ways, prides itself on being, quote unquote, a secular institution. And these students, it was just so interesting and in one sense fun, but also very sad for me to hear them talk this way. They were talking in almost what I thought of as very Christian theological terms. They were talking about the specialness of being human and the fear that AI technologies will really take over that specialness of being human. And will we, again, as the general public thinks from my survey, will we be able to return from that if we, on a mass scale, stop thinking of humanness as humans as being special? And then we had a long talk about what it means to be special and what they thought that meant, which was really fascinating. Secondly, my students are very cynical about the motives of tech giants, and they see a kind of slippery slope where if we don't hold tech accountable to benefiting all of society, that we will just continue to worsen inequalities, as I said before. One student said, AI will never truly benefit everyone in society because the people at the top are simply too greedy. And this student was very cynical and said it should never, AI should never have been released for public use. There was, related to that, a real concern for efficiency critique, where the students thought that AI made things so efficient that should not be efficient. It's fascinating when you talk to students because we are afraid, and I'm right there with you, those who are professors, we are afraid of students using AI too much in their assignments. They are afraid of professors using AI too much in their teaching. They are very afraid of that. My 16-year-old came home. A teacher apparently used AI. My daughter knew this because she said it has those little telltale lines on it, and it's all in the same font. She said it's too perfect. Teachers make more mistakes than this. And so she said I could tell, that it was AI generated, and she said she didn't even erase the little lines, So that was just a sense that how could you not? Did you care enough? My daughter was very upset about this. She's very upset about AI and thinks about it a lot and talks to her friends. It's almost for some of our young people a kind of existential struggle, and I think we need to really recognize that. So I asked my students what they meant by this sort of a critique of efficiency and what kind of things shouldn't be efficient. And they said grief should not be efficient. Thought that was really wonderful. And mentorship should not be efficient. And getting to know someone should not be efficient. They said that things like this requires, one student put, the friction of time. This really comes home to someone like me. Some of you, a few of you in the room know me pretty well, and I am somewhat slavish to efficiency. So I had some health struggles, and my doctor said that I should have more rest. And so my husband wanted to keep me accountable to this, and so I said, okay, here I am. I'm being kept accountable to having more rest. Here's my rest plan. So here is, I'm going to rest for 2 hours, and for the first 20 minutes, I'm going to read. For the next 15 minutes, I'm going to do yoga. Then for the next, 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you. And he's like, you even rest aggressively. So, and I was in traffic, and I got really anxious. I need to get my child someplace, and she was with me, and she's like, you're doing all that restful deep breathing. She's like, it's so stressful. So I'm like, you're just breathing, and trying to calm your body, and it's very and she's like, so I'm not there. I just want to really be honest, I'm someone who needs to learn. So now we're to the last point, and this will be a kind of short one. I want to provide just a few theological reflections that I've learned from spiritual leaders or I put in practice myself, just to think through related to the idea of human flourishing in the midst of using AI technologies in our workplaces. And going back to that idea of calling, the first thing I want you to think about is, how are you called in relationship to AI to use AI for the glory of God? So I want you to ponder whether you might have a kind of special calling to use AI for the glory of God. Are you someone who thinks of yourself, for example, I have a few specific questions. Are you an early adopter? Do you like to learn new things? Are you someone who could really try out these technologies to figure them out theologically? And I've been challenging myself to do this. I'm trying to use AI technologies at least every other day or so, not necessarily for the purpose of making my work more efficient, but just so I understand them and I know what I think, and I can start to think about, who am I in relationship to AI, and how do I want to use AI in a way that's compatible with the theological things that I hold most dearly. So how can I use AI in a way that sees others as made in the image of God, and that sees myself as made in the image of God, that does not see time as something to control, but something to be experienced as a gift. And so are there things that you think about that you can try to hold those theological principles and then think about how those relate to AI? And I'm really hoping and praying that some of us in this room are called to learn how to use AI for the glory of God. So I want to really put that out there for you. Secondly, I spent a lot of my professional career studying how religious and scientific communities relate to one another. I have fought a lot in my academic scholarship and in my personal outreach work to churches and scientific organizations to really foster the idea of compatibility and the idea of a real cohesion between science and faith. And I could start giving another talk about that, which I'm not going to do. But I think AI technologies may be an area where some of us are called on as Christians to have real conflict, and that there might be a way in which conflict is incredibly healthy as a response to AI, that we might be people who could put the brakes on something, who could set ethical boundaries. We might be in an age where we're called as Christians to be boundary setters with this particular technology. And I can tell you that technologists, that my students, that many in the broader society are looking for that. They're looking to be told what the boundaries should be. And I think this could be a real chance for the church to step up, for intellectuals in this room to really challenge the development and the particular types of use of certain AI technologies. Here's a couple of things that I think I want to leave you with as spiritual practices. One thing that's really important is to recognize that some of the push for expansion in AI technologies is based, I think, in, and I'll just name it for what I think it is a deeply sinful desire to be God. We must remember that it is artificial intelligence, right? It mimics real. It mimics truth. The AI does not have a soul. It cannot care in the way that we care. And some of the ways in which we are, and you can see this both, I mean, and sadly I think Christians are probably falling as much as likely to fall prey to this as others who are not Christians in the broader world who are creating and using AI technologies. It's within the U.S. Individualism ethos that we have a very hard time accepting human limitations, right? That what's behind my rest list is that I want to check something off so that I can really then quickly get on to what I think my real purpose is, to do my work, which I'm using for my identity, so I can pretend for a while that I'm not a middle-aged woman, right? It's funny that we call me middle-aged. It's very unlikely for me to live to be twice my age that I am now, but I'll just go with the middle-aged thing. So we need to really think about that and embrace our human limitations as a gift, not a bug to be programmed out. So we need a spiritual practice that will help us really acknowledge those limitations. And one thing I'm trying to do is to practice a breath prayer and the phrase from Psalm 46, to be still and know on the inhale that I am God on the exhale. And so we want to acknowledge that God is God and we are not. And I think it's important to acknowledge that for some of us to really embody the spiritual practice and to acknowledge that each time we use an AI technology. So to put ourselves in the right place to use the technology, which can be wonderful and can actually, I think, has the capacity to increase our creativity under certain conditions, to decrease the toil of others' work and our own, to increase relational energy, but we must use it from a sense of our own finiteness, right? I also think it's important to think about the spiritual practices that we need to inculcate in young people and students to give them the kind of spiritual base and foundation that will allow them to move into this next phase of our technological world and really do work for the broader kingdom of God. And the principal one that I see, I think there's two. One is the deep need to continue to train in quiet and reflection. Technology develops very, very fast. This was always true, and proceeds much faster than theological reflection on it proceeds. Reflection is necessarily slow because we need to put ourselves in a place where we can listen, right? We need to cultivate practices of slow thinking, slow being in a world that demands instant efficiency. The act of stopping to pray, to reflect, or simply to be is a radical act of faith. When I do not look at my email after 6 p.m., that's still really, really hard for me. I don't know who I think is going to want me to do something at 10:15 p.m., but I continue to believe that. It's very hard. I put all kinds of things on my phone in order to make it look less interesting. I put all these different screen things. I made the phone black and white and not color, so it would be less appealing to me visually, and then I couldn't figure out how to get it to stop, so I'd have my daughter unprogram it, so because I couldn't handle it. So I'm just being really honest here with you folks. But I think as educators that we can, for those of us who are educators, that we can begin to model pause in our lives, begin to work pause into our classes. I've actually tried doing this in my own classes at Rice University, where I have the students completely cease using technology in my classroom for the hour and 15 minutes that they're with me. We have a covenant at the beginning of the class where we don't use technology, and if there's a disability or some reason they need to, then they can ask for an exemption. But in general, the students really like it. They ask for the handouts, they like to write. I have them buy a journal that they think is beautiful and bring that to class and write in it. Sometimes I have them put their heads on their desks for a few minutes. So are there ways in which we can begin to embody a sense of quiet for our students? And lastly, I think we want to keep people connected to their labor. We use AI technologies in a context, and we use AI, whether we like it or not, we are part of a community. And AI changes the landscape. We need to teach students how to use AI technologies in a way in their workplaces, in their lives, that are not disembodied. And I think that's incredibly important, and it's going to take a long time for us to really figure out what that means as new technologies begin to develop. Part of it, I think, is recognizing with a kind of gratitude that we have access to certain technologies that people in other places of the world and people in other places in U.S. society do not. So it's important to remind students and ourselves that 1 in 7 of those in the U.S. still does not have a computer at all. And 1/3 of the global population does not have any access to a computer. And that's households, so the individuals would be a much greater number. And so we need to teach our students to keep connected to their labor, to their own thoughts, as a way of also giving them appreciation for the labor and the thoughts of others in our global community and in our local communities. I have begun, as a way of keeping myself disciplined in this regard, I've begun to handwrite out my papers and books again, because I want to remain connected to that first, and maybe this will go the way of the dodo bird, right? Like maybe no one will ever handwrite again in 4 years, I don't know. But for now, this seems like the right practice for me, so that I am connected to my own creativity. And I have begun a kind of staged writing process where I first write it down, then I type it in, and I don't allow myself to use any kind of AI until about the 4th draft. Maybe I shouldn't use any at all, I don't know, but that's where I am right now, and that's what I'm trying. I have to tell you, when I told the students in one of my classes that they were going to be writing just on paper, a young man looked to the rest of the group and said out loud, "When is the last time you used paper?" It's like, whoa, talk about safely middle-aged, so here we are. So I think we have a calling to work, not just to be productive, but to be deeply relational and to ensure that the systems that we build allow for the flourishing of all people. And I want us in this room to be ones that advocate for that human flourishing in our lives and in our communities as we go forward into this new world of AI. Thank you.
Dr. Ecklund, thank you so much for that amazing talk. We now will have about 15 minutes of time for questions, and Dr. Ecklund said that she's actually really excited for this time because she would love to dialogue with you all. Just a couple guardrails, speaking of AI, but going against what Dr. Ecklund said, we say, please do not have 3 points in your questions, and keep the questions efficient, okay? Okay. And we have a couple of mics going around. Okay.
Thank you for your talk. I really appreciate it. This is regarding your idea about calling. Mm-hmm. Over the last 30 years, several $100 million has been invested in the faith and work movement in America, the industry of books, publishing, institutes, etc. And it seems like the statistics you see, the number of people who understand their calling and human flourishing is actually going down. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, is there something in the water in the modern world, to quote another sociologist, Hartmut Rosa, this social acceleration, are we actually in a moment where it's hard to find calling because of BS jobs or all other kind of provocative theories? Are we actually in a unique moment?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a couple of things, just to make a methodological point, is that I'm not sure that we can directly link the increase in faith at work movement to the decrease in people recognizing their work as a calling. That would be probably a different type of study. But I'm a fan of Rosa as well. I do think that it's very hard in the diversification of jobs we have right now, the newness, to know how to be called to the kinds of jobs that are developing. And we're preparing, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this before, we're preparing students for jobs that we don't even know exist or even what they would be. And so it's not as easy to prepare to feel called for a job now as I know. So I think that is evidently true. And the last thing I would say is that calling is sometimes realized it's not necessarily always chased. And that really came out very powerfully in our research, that often people realized that they were called to something after they were already in the occupation, rather than sensing the call and then moving towards that occupation, which I think is more ideal, typical idea of how calling would proceed. But really good ideas. Okay, yes?
Oh, stand, oh gosh.
Is this on?
I loved how you talked about toil, and I teach students as well, and so I'm curious, their entry-level work, there's so much toil, right?
Yeah.
So how do you talk to your students? What do those conversations look like? Where do you help them understand that the toil really helps them build resilience, helps them, you know, work with people, talk with people, instead of just sending out these automated, you know, email responses?
Yeah, so I want to make the distinction between meaningless toil and hard work. So I think that's really important. I do think that students need to develop more of a capacity to struggle and be okay with that. And that is, we have become habituated, and I have as well. I mean, it is interesting. I think probably the thing that I do that could be most helped by AI, I don't know if this is real help, I'm just really struggling with this, is writing. And I think about how much I gain from really struggling over something with my writing, like writing a paragraph and then throwing it out completely and starting over, and the kind of feedback that I've gotten over the years from colleagues and editors and other kinds of folks. And to do away with that in order to just be efficient in my writing, or even more effective. I want to really also interrogate what the word effective means in that context. So somehow we have to keep teaching students what it means to be okay with struggle and work hard and to be resilient. I mean, that word is now overused in relationship to higher education, but I still think it has some traction. To be resilient, I think, is really an important set of skills that we need to think about as professors right now. And it is an antidote, I think. I'm thinking about what are the spiritual practices or the propensities that might be something of a guardrail or an antidote to what we see coming our way, or right, what we're in the midst of. Yeah, that's a good thing that you say. Thank you.
Hi. I keep thinking, when you were talking about your student who looked at the class and said, when was the last time you used paper, right? All of us have students for one semester, maybe a handful if they're in a major that we also teach in, right? They've been trained by so many other educators in certain practices that may or may not be, humanizing in the ways you're talking about, right? You may have colleagues who are on board with what you're doing. You may have an institution that's on board with that. You may not. What are some ways for educators to, I don't want to use the word efficient, but maybe most, I don't like the word effective either.
I know, it's really hard, isn't it?
Best use those, the amount of time we have with students.
Yeah, that's great. That is exactly right. It's really beautifully put. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I'm a big journaler, so I journal about every morning. And I've been journaling about that because there's a push right now as professors to innovate very quickly, to be very cutting edge and very innovative. I feel that a lot, and I feel scared that I may be aging out of the ability to innovate fast enough. So that's all going on. And then there's also a push to teach students the old style skills, right? That we feel like we are maybe now the only ones who can teach them that because the rest of society is innovating so quickly and pushing them towards a meaningless kind of efficiency. And so I've been trying to think about just the 3 or 4 things that I could do reasonably in my given context, which includes my semester and my life and all the other things, that might push them towards having the right kind of propensities to deal with the new technologies. And so I'm working more silence and reflection into the actual class time, just to get down to brass tacks here. I'm having students read aloud more, because I think that helps them remember or learn how to read slowly, which is something that's being lost. I'm trying to assign more original texts, and I'm going back to doing more conversation. I think there's oral exams are a plus and a minus, because we know that some types of people don't perform as well under those conditions, et cetera, but I am trying to do more oral assessment and more handwriting, and to talk more to them about the reasons that I'm doing those things, and to take advantage of things like class covenants. And now I'm just talking about classroom teaching. There's of course all kinds of other ways we teach through mentoring and modeling and things like that, but that's where I am right now.
Hi. So you briefly mentioned about like you needing to take more rest in your life with like what your doctor recommended you, and then your husband holding you accountable to that. I think as someone who's going into academia, and then also for the people that are here in academia, I know that your experience is probably not the only one of that, of experiencing stress and high levels of anxiety, and even being at home, but you're not really at home, you're still thinking about your work. And as a current student, I know that I also experienced that. And so my question would be, how have the last 5 years, has that always been a thing for you in terms of work-life separation, or just like the mental separation? Has AI, or like the world we're living in, like magnified that, of like, feeling like we constantly need to be efficient? And then in you taking steps to find rest for your body and your mind and your soul with the Lord, have you seen improvements in that? Not out of in a like efficient way, but just like a genuine intimacy with the Lord. And what advice would you speak into for all of us here in that?
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. So I am happy to, we don't have space for me to share about this now, but I'm happy to talk individually with anyone. I've had some very specific kinds of health problems that have required me to slow down. And so I've had to have something of a kind of crash course in how to do this in a way that works for me in my particular life, right? You hear doctors say this, like the most effective exercise is the exercise you actually do. So, I mean, I would say that about rest as well, is the most effective way to rest is the way that you actually do, and which is going to require, you speaking to people who really love you and know you and have observed you. For me, I find it very helpful to think of rest as something I do on an hourly cycle, something I do on a daily cycle, something I do on a weekly cycle, something I do on a monthly cycle, and something I do on a yearly cycle. My husband and I always have a joke because I always develop a philosophy of everything, so this is my philosophy of rest. But and that is very helpful to me. I am so motivated, and you have to know your own. I mean, I think there are people who struggle with being a little too lazy, right? There are different kinds of struggles that people have, and I really have the struggle of being drawn towards making my identity through work for lots of different reasons that I've analyzed over the years, and I need to be reminded very frequently not to do that. And so I literally get up from the computer and take a couple of laps around my building, or take a walk, or do some breathing, or do some praying, or just lay down. So I do that, I try to do that on almost an hourly basis. And then I'm trying to also think about the day and when the work is over, and not working so there's a way in which you can work frenetically just so you can have an hour to rest, So I think changing my whole cadence to be slower, it is really, really important. I'm being held accountable by all the people who really know me in my mind right now, because I don't always do this, they would say. And then really thinking about the Sabbath and what is restful and orienting. I think part of the Sabbath is orienting ourselves towards God and towards His community. And so I want to do that. And not like just read the Sunday New York Times or whatever your Sunday paper is. That's actually not very restful, right? And so that's been something that I had to think about. And then what does it mean to like take true vacations, on a yearly basis? So I've been thinking a lot about that. And then I think it's really important in a teaching environment that we have some students who we know quite well and who we might start to share those things with. So I've actually been talking to my students about, what a cadence of rest might look like in their particular lives. And it's actually been a kind of vulnerable thing for me because I would say that's not something that's like at the top of the list to talk about in academia, especially the kind of environment where I am. And I think it's been something that has been, I'm going to say this humbly, I think been a kind of witness, an interesting kind of witness. I've been surprised by that.
One last question back there. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Over here.
Sorry.
I was struck by the fact that you mentioned the wisdom that students already have about this. Because sometimes faculty are just like, they grew up without knowing how to read, and we got to like impose like the old ways on them, and it's like, but actually maybe is it that we're not really listening to them, and how can we do that better?
I think because I started to do that. Well, I'm sorry. Tell me the question. I think I'm starting to talk and I don't understand.
Is this? Oh, it is on. The question is just, how are we maybe missing that the students already have this wisdom? They're actually probably got some things to teach us about what we need to pay attention to. Just given even some of their fears and stuff, right? Those fears that you mentioned, I mean, they're actually pretty wise, they're sharp, right? About what this might be costing us. So yeah, how can we listen better to them?
I've been really surprised by that myself. I mean, I do think sometimes we're in a bit of combat with our students over, at least mentally, over, and sometimes in actuality, over technological advancement through AI. And some of it is very scary. I want to acknowledge that and the fear I have. It's sometimes they're so effective at using it, you just can't tell at all whether they're using it to cheat, and you get afraid that you just won't be able to teach in this new era. Like, what will that even mean? And that is really scary, and I get afraid of that. And I get afraid, I had like a whole technological, I did like an SOS tech call I'm telling you all these funny things I do, and my husband's very funny too, but he should tell his own stuff. I shouldn't tell it about him. But I had like a big technological problem with getting my PowerPoint off the computer and, sending it over to Elijah, and there's some kind of security thing, whatever. So I know it was probably user error, but I called him and I'm like, I've got 30 minutes before I have to go over for this talk, and I was like teary. I was like, I can't even I was like, I'm being attacked spiritually in like a technological way, right? I was very like, and he's like, let's not overgeneralize here. Like, it's very like, have you tried this? Because there are other ways, you use paper, but we do feel like we're kind of sinking fast is how I have it. And so I wanted to the reason I did that with the students is because I wanted to just get a different way of looking at things. And I think when you have that like feeling, sometimes it's because your identity's in the wrong place, or you don't have a really good understanding of your own limitations, and it's helpful just to get another perspective. And that was really useful to me. So I've been trying to think about what don't I understand here, and how can I learn from people who know more about the technologies. I mean, digital natives, I am not a digital native. I mean, I did not have a smartphone until I got one when my daughter was born. So like 36 years old, I think. And that's not a digital native. And so, just in case you're wondering. And so then we are in a very interesting period in time where we really need to learn from young people who are, those who are younger than us, who are more digital natives, at the same time as we're responsible for conveying wisdom to them about how to use those very technologies that we need to learn from them. So it's a very particular kind of task and space that we find ourselves in, and how to deal with that thoughtfully, I think, is really the question right now. And I'm just so impressed with all of you. Can I just say that? Like, it was just so fun to be in the panels today and to hear people talking, and I just learned so much. I just know a lot of you in this room are really far along and thinking deeply about that, and that's just really encouraging.